Amana, and welcome to the Natural Birth Podcast. How are you?
I'm so delighted and honored to be here. Thank you.
Excited to have you on. We found each other on social media as you do nowadays. And,
Yes.
in August, I came on to your beautiful podcast, and
Yes.
you are coming onto mine. And I'm really looking forward to hearing about your birth journey. You've been pregnant 6 times. You've had some early losses and one baby born that would not survive, which is such a beautiful story. I've heard a little bit snippets of that from you before, and you have two live children. And I really, really encourage you to take us through all of them because on this podcast we honor natural birth and natural death. And I just know that you hold so much embodied wisdom with both of them. So,
Mm.
do you want to take us back to becoming pregnant the first time and take us on your journey?
Sure. I would love to maybe start a little bit before pregnancy, if that is okay with you. And that I was one of those women who knew from a very young age that I always wanted to be a mother and was interested and curious in birth stories and would like ask my mom how my birth was. And she birthed two sons before me naturally in the hospital and then chose to have an epidural with me, just to see what it was like. She said she wouldn't have done it again. She would have just done it naturally without the epidural.
Mm.
But my mother was birthed from her mother. It was an unplanned, unassisted birth inside of their grandparents' home as my grandfather was, I guess, putting his pants on, getting ready to take her to the hospital. And my mother was born en call inside on the bottom of these steps inside their house. And I just think that is so wonderful and beautiful.
Mm, beautiful. I love that that was the stories you heard as a child.
I got to go see those stairs where my mom like took her first breaths when I was maybe 7 or 8 years old. And that was really beautiful. And my grandma also told me a few stories of being called to like neighbors' births that women that were choosing not to go to the hospital and the husband came and got her and she witnessed the baby being born and she said the placenta like flew out and slid across the floor and part of it like clots went down into the vent or whatever, the heating vent. So I feel really lucky to have heard those stories. And yet at the same time, I didn't I knew from a young age I wanted to have a home birth. Like I knew that for sure, but I didn't actually hear about free birth, like planned free birth until I was after I'd given birth to my son. And so interesting that I could be in that world and like know that my mom was born unassisted and yet not think about that as a choice that I could make for myself.
Mm, right. Well, I guess we're really influenced just by our society, right? So,
Hmm.
and I mean, it's really, really become the rage. What, the last 5, 10 years max? Kind of
Hmm.
that's become
Hmm.
something that's more people are more conscious about it. I mean, it's even in the newspapers now.
Right.
The
Yeah.
the general population kind of know that women choose to do this, whereas like
Hmm.
I don't think that was even 5 years ago something that the more kind of normie general person
Right.
would know, right? Yeah.
No. Yeah. So I always knew that I wanted to have babies but I was in my like early 30s, had just kind of got my heart broken and out of a bad relationship and was sort of like, okay, universe, like I had always thought I wanted to be a younger mom, like in my 20s. And so I hadn't met the father of my children. So I decided to make this call out to universe and I felt like I could feel my spirit babies. And so I asked them to like lead me to their dad and came up with this 40-day ritual that I did and asked him to meet me at this particular festival. and was like, okay, universe, like if I'm meant to have babies, like please, like, and I did this ritual and asked him to meet me there and was okay if that didn't happen, that I would just choose a different path in life. But as fate would have it, on the summer solstice at this festival, after doing my 40 days of ritual prior, a little periwinkle butterfly flew in front of my face and over to like behind this speaker where I just could see the legs of this man who then stepped out from behind the speaker. And I looked at him and he looked at me. And he kind of eventually, walked around the crowd and then came and introduced himself to me. And he's also very shy. After he introduced himself, he actually like walked off shy. But as then maybe 20 minutes later, I just kind of said to universe, okay, I guess he's not the one, and went along my day. But about 20 minutes later, I was walking into a booth and he happened to be in that booth on his knees giving a massage to the woman, Judith Brown Hawk, who it was her booth, this Indigenous woman. And immediately she said she saw me and she knew, and he stepped up and came out from the booth and embraced me again. And Judith took her um, concoction of her sage and sweetgrass and lavender and sprinkled it around us in a circle because she could see and know that we were going to be together. In those next moments, we asked each other, how old are you? Do you want to have kids? Do you have kids? Do you want kids? Like, and sat down together, had our first kiss. And 2 weeks later, he proposed and we got married. And even that same day, his friends said that he saw me with him and was like, "Oh yeah, there's Owen and his woman." Like, and then was like, "Wait, what? Owen and his woman?" Like, but from the very beginning, from that first day, it was just so understood that we were going to be together from there forward. And that next day, he even cried and said, thank you for looking for me. Like I'd given up hope.
Wow.
And it was just a magical start to that union that
Wow.
then, yeah, led to our openness fairly early on to the conception of our spirit babies that we felt were near. And
Amazing.
I
What a magical story. Wow. Not many people have that kind of story of meeting their other half. That's magical. Wow.
no, yeah, I mean, I feel like I couldn't have like written it better. It feels very magical.
Yeah. Amazing.
hmm
How long a time ago was this? How old were you?
Um, so that was 10 years ago now. We just had our 10-year anniversary of being married.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I'm gonna be 42 in November. So
Yeah.
I was, yeah, 31 at the time.
Magic.
hmm
Did you conceive quickly after that?
Yeah, so we got married in September, near the autumn equinox. And then we conceived for the first time pretty much, I guess it was like right after that, because then it was at the end of October that I had my 6 week early birth, my first pregnancy. So I was, so excited to be pregnant. And then actually it was on our way to our honeymoon that I started bleeding.
Mm, okay.
So yeah, so that was hard and sad to me. And of course, not of course, but he struggled a little bit with supporting me or understanding how I was so
Mm,
attached already. But he did the best that he was able to at the time and just, held me and was with me. And our time in Hawaii looked a little different than it would have had I still been pregnant and not been bleeding at that time.
yeah, I think it is hard for them to understand. And for us, it's like, especially when you're longing for a child, you kind of in your heart become a mother when you start having that longing. And for you, that had been a long time. And then, knowing you're pregnant, that's just the manifestation of already, you know, what you're feeling inside. And so even though quote unquote it was early, it's not,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Been a long process and you've carried the
Mm-hmm.
seed of that longing in child for however long, right?
Yes, since I was a young toddler, really, I knew I wanted babies.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Beautiful. So how did you move on from that early loss? Did you try to conceive again, or did you need a break, or how was your journey after that?
We were very open to conception right away after. I then did have more fear
Mm,
inside of me after that early loss. And so we did conceive again, just a couple months later.
mm,
And I was excited and we were both excited and just I had this different energy about it though, in the way that I was like speaking to this little wombling and asking them to stay
mm.
and not go. And in this pregnancy, I was very super nauseous, puking all over the place. I was at the time working in the emergency department as a registered nurse, and I just remember that being some of the like smells and things were quite challenging there, but I made it through, and I had, yeah, I chose a single practice midwife in the area that I connected with. And she was very comfortable with no ultrasound. Some medical midwives are not, and she very much was. So I was also comfortable with that and had chosen not to have an ultrasound. I did like in my mind speak to this little wombling and say, just if you need an ultrasound, let me know. Although I don't know what that didn't know what that really meant, but that's something that I did say. Uh, and when I was about 6 months along in this pregnancy, I started having some right-sided, like low back pain. And I had never been this pregnant before, and I had heard about round ligament pain and different things. So I just sort of thought it was, some normal pregnancy pain. And after being up a lot for a few nights, I started having bloody urine.
Mm.
And at that point, I chose to engage with the medical system and see what this bloody urine was about. And they ultrasounded my kidneys, and I had a blocked right ureter, which is the tube between your kidney and your bladder. There's a tube and it's called a ureter. I'd never had kidney stones before. It was like a globular stone, they called it. And at the time, they offered like two different options that were both surgical to either have a stent placed or have like where they put a tube where your urine comes out your back. Like I would have a urinary bag out my back for a period of time. And I chose to have this stent placed. It's a surgery that normally you would be under general anesthesia, but because I was pregnant and knew that that was more harmful, um, I asked for another option and like knew that a spinal could be a possibility. The first physician I spoke to that was like the OBGYN, she's like, the surgeon's not gonna like allow that. When I talked to the surgeon, he did allow it. So I was awake during the procedure. And yeah, I was awake during the procedure and it went fine. They did like the OBGYN was like, you haven't had an ultrasound and like, who's your care provider? And sort of had some of that energy that I could tell was negativity toward midwifery in general, because obviously she didn't actually know my midwife or anything about her or any of that. They asked again about doing an ultrasound, and at that point, was sort of thinking, well, maybe I will. So they made me an appointment, and I did have an ultrasound a couple of days later. I was about 6 months pregnant, so I could, already feel this little wombling moving around and all of the things. very connected and excited to, birth this baby. And at the ultrasound, we were told that our baby did not have kidneys. So this baby would not survive outside of my womb. It's the kidneys that help develop the lungs. So it's the urine that they're, you know, uh, so that was just like a huge, huge experience. I didn't break down right in the office. I asked to leave, and once we got to the car and got home, I just wailed and cried, and it was probably the saddest day of my life
Mm.
to hear that, even knowing that this little baby, we didn't know if it was a boy or a girl at the time, but it was a little girl. But I just remember, holding my womb and just being so angry at universe, angry at my body, like just not understanding. Um, yeah, so we just like sat in that grief for a period of time at that ultrasound appointment that he also offered that, right then we could induce labor. He could like take me up and induce labor. And I was just like, no.
It's crazy how that is just like no time, understanding of the time of processing, grieving, and also that there's other options. Like that's the
Hmm.
option for them.
Yeah, so I decided I wanted to hold this baby in my womb for as long as she was going to be there and wait for her natural birth time. And so I didn't work for those next couple of months. I took that time off of work. I made super intentional memories with this little woundling. My husband and I just embraced that this was the time we were going to get with this soul. And, we took little trips. I read her this book, like Blueberries for Sal, and would eat blueberries and be like, this is what blueberries taste like, to the effect that she could, taste inside the womb, and planned this home birth with that same midwife. It was also seen that she was in the Frank breech position, so like bum down. And yeah, so I got to speak to a few other women, which was really helpful, that had walked a similar path or, had babies with the same, it's called bilateral renal agenesis, where they don't have any kidneys. And yeah, we just lived our life and embraced this little soul and waited for labor to begin.
Yeah.
And when I was about 37 weeks is when labor started. I didn't want labor to begin.
Yeah.
I knew that, birth meant death for her. I knew that there was a possibility she could also die in labor because there's not that much amniotic fluid. So cord compression is more possible. Um, so when labor started, I, tried to sort of stop it or slow it. I took a bath and like drank a glass of wine. But it continued gently. Her labor happened across 3 days. So we went through 2 nights of labor together. And yeah, my husband was there with me, supporting me. Um, it was sweet and beautiful. It wasn't until the last kind of few hours that we called the midwife to come be with us. And so she showed up, and it felt nice to have her present. She's very maternal. I'm still friends with this woman today. And yeah, labor continued, got stronger. Eventually I got in the birthing pool, and that felt nice. And it was around 1:31 in the morning on some Monday morning after going into labor on a Friday evening. And I could feel I started having those pushing contractions and felt that kind of energy that I had witnessed many times in my birth work. I had attended births for several years at this time already as a birth assistant. So I was very familiar. And my husband remembers that I called out to the midwife, Tammy, at that time, said, Tammy, she was like sleeping in the bedroom a little ways away. And she came out. And so I was in the birth pool, and my husband was kind of behind me over the birth pool, but supporting me. And her little bum came out part way and then a little more. And I had chosen not to like do any sort of monitoring of baby because I didn't want to know if she died during labor.
Mm.
Hmm.
Yeah, beautiful. Just being with.
Yeah. So then, I pushed a little more. She came out a bit more. And then I remember her like legs flopped down and she kicked. And so we could like feel that she was alive. And I remember telling my husband to like reach down and feel the baby, and he did. And then she was born to like just like, the top of her head was sort of still inside of me. And then one more push, and I just pulled her up to me quickly and held her. And she, took a few kind of gasping, agonal type breathing. And then she stopped breathing. She never opened her eyes, but I got to hold her for those few moments when she was alive outside of me.
Mm.
And, then we sobbed and cried, and my husband held me and as I held her. And yeah, a little while later, I birthed her placenta while I was still in the birthing pool. And eventually we got up and moved to the bedroom. One of the really most tender moments for my husband in this time was when he brought her, we named her Hartley, to the bed. And our dog like jumped up on the bed to see the baby and could see that our baby wasn't moving. And so Jake was like, nudging the baby, like trying to get the baby to wake up. And that was a very,
Mm.
yeah, hard time for my husband. It really broke him down into tears even more. Um, and then after that, a while later, my husband did fall asleep. I was having a hard time falling asleep. I just held my baby and wanted to just be with her and look her over. I slept with her, kept her with me,
Beautiful.
and that felt good to me. I we were told, we could keep her kind of as long as we needed or wanted, which was so helpful.
Mm.
So we did keep her at home for another, I guess it was like a day and a half.
Mm.
So another full day and night. At this point, it was a little bit challenging in that, everyone grieves differently and is comfortable with different aspects. And I really wanted to be with her body and close to it, but after he had his time with her body, my husband, it was hard for him to see her as that, reminder, this dead body.
Mm.
So, but he was also supportive knowing that I needed it. And so, but there was that little bit of disconnect of not having that same closeness to be together after that. But yeah, it felt good. I, did a little like bath with her with oils, like anointed her with frankincense and, Chris wrapped her with a blanket that my sister had made specially for her. And some crystals. I brought her body out into the sunshine.
Mm.
And yeah, it felt like I never wanted to give this body, this being that we had created together up.
Mm.
In Washington State, which is where I live, you have to have a certain license to transport a dead body. So we had to have someone come to our home to take her body to be cremated. We couldn't just bury her body anywhere at this gestation with the laws here. So, and I knew I didn't want to have like a grave site in a cemetery because for me that just isn't in alignment with me. So we did have her cremated, and again, that was a big pain point or a hard moment for both myself and my husband to have her body taken away.
I understand that.
hmm
Mm.
Um, Yeah, and we decided he had some time off of work after that, so we decided we were going to take a trip down the Oregon coast, which is a really beautiful place with the ocean, and it felt good to just be outside of our normal space, our normal, home where we expected her to be with us and all these things. And it just gave us some time to grieve and process along the way. We brought her ashes with us. We waited till her ashes were ready and brought them with us and carried them everywhere, into the restaurants, into the stores. Her ashes came with us. And I was also at that time pumping my milk. I just really wanted to, it felt good to know that I could create milk.
Mm.
And it also felt good for something positive in a way to come from it. On the trip, I wasn't donating my milk, but when we got back, I donated my milk
Mm.
for about a month, and that felt good to me.
Mm. Beautiful.
And yeah, we just continued on in our life, but with this grief journey where we were, in the depths together, but also recognizing the levity and joy at the same time. And it brought us closer together, even in the midst of that deep grief, which I'm really grateful for because I know it's not always the way.
Yeah. What do you think made it so for you two?
Hmm. We, I just feel like we both continued to turn towards one another
Mm.
and also honor each other's ways of expressing and being with grief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's such a important part, isn't it? That
hmm
however that other person need wants to grieve and for however long that it's not, oh, now it's been this long. Now you shouldn't grieve anymore. To have
hmm
passion and openness for the person to be in the kind of grief they need to be.
Yes. And for me, I had had one other major like dark night of the soul into the depths of grief before in my 20s when I was 25. My first love, who was 26, died of cancer, and I was there with him. And so having had that experience definitely helped me to know that as hard as it was, that I there would be life beyond.
Yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful. That's
hmm Yeah.
powerful.
Hmm. So then he and I both felt open to conception again. I think, there was part of me that just kind of wanted to like fill that void or be pregnant again that I could feel. I just remember being able to like fold forward after she was born that, that she wasn't there and how sad and hard that was. Just feeling her, although I felt her presence in some ways, but just that it's not the same when the presence is not embodied. It's a different sort of spiritual presence to feel
Mm.
her around without the body. But I believe my body was wise in giving me several months to not be pregnant again. And then eventually I did become pregnant again and was, delighted, excited. I guess I will say between Hartley and my son Odin, we did have, my husband and I both had ultrasounds just to see that we both had both of our kidneys. Because
Mm.
that's one of the things you can go through life only having one kidney and not know it. And so I just wanted to know that it would be unlikely that we would have another baby without both kidneys. And because we both had both of our kidneys, that would be unlikely.
Yeah.
So,
I also want to say, just with your story, I was thinking that how curious that you had a problem with your kidney, which alerted you to your baby's condition.
yes.
Mm.
Yes, absolutely. I normally sort of point that out, so I'm glad that you circled back to it because, yeah, it felt like her way of communicating to me have this problem with my kidney only to find out she didn't have kidneys. And sometimes people ask me like, well, do you wish you hadn't known, before you gave birth? And for me, I'm actually so grateful that I did know because it then gave that really intentional time, those last months of pregnancy, making those very intentional memories and taking so many belly pics and, visiting family. And like if I would have still birthed her at home, right? And if I had birthed her at home and she wasn't breathing, we would have been doing all
Yeah.
the things I knew to do to try to help a baby breathe that would have been things that were uncomfortable for her and just made that
Mhm.
those moments, like, fear and
Yes.
anxiety and all of that. Whereas the few moments that she was alive got to be just filled with love rather than that other type of energy.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah, it really sounded like it, that you could have this beautiful intentional time. Like, so precious, so precious.
Yeah, and I guess I will quickly maybe mention that my beautiful community that before she was born did a blessing away ceremony for me, a different type, like knowing that she wouldn't live, but my community still gathered around me. It was, yeah, like 15 other women and
Mm.
just held me in the knowing and honored me as a mother and this little baby in my womb as a life. And that was also like still sticks with me so tenderly, that experience with these women honoring me and birth and the known death that would come.
Wow. That's also so precious. That's so beautiful. So after a few months, you became pregnant again.
I would maybe call it several months. Like I maybe would have wanted to be pregnant sooner. There's part of me that did, but I feel like there's wisdom in
Mm.
the a little bit larger gap there. Yeah.
Mm.
And yeah, then I did become pregnant again, and I was again super excited and hopeful, and of course, continued to hold the knowing that just because there's life in this moment, it doesn't mean there will be, life moving forward.
Mm.
Uh, hmm And so this little one, his 40-week time was like the end of December, December 29th, I think was his 40-week mark. So it's a fun time to, after bigger, getting cozy in pregnancy. And in this pregnancy, I didn't have like hardly any nausea. I threw up just once, like from an actual sickness, not from pregnancy. So that felt really nice. I did choose a different path in that I chose to have an ultrasound with him to anatomically see that he had kidneys.
Mm.
So I did do that, which, yeah, it felt good to know that at the time.
Yeah, beautiful.
hmm And continued to plan a home birth, even though, different people didn't think that was a good idea, but I did. So,
Well, you had successfully birthed a baby before at home, of course.
mhm.
Did you choose the same midwife?
I initially chose the same midwife, and then when I was near like 37 or 38 weeks, I think, she was just at a different time in her life going through some personal things, and I could feel that there was an alignment there, and so I did switch to a different midwife near the end of that pregnancy. hmm
Beautiful. I love that. I love that you followed that intuition and knowing.
hmm
Mm.
Yeah, so again, was very excited to give birth and just know that this baby had their kid, all his parts. Didn't know it was a boy then, but just knowing that this baby had all their parts. And again, sitting with the knowing that that didn't mean that I was gonna have a live baby still, but continued forward. I did ask this little baby to breathe right away. That was one of the my like requests was just please like because I had witnessed so many variations in the first breath and I understand that it can take many minutes and that's so normal and all of that and yet I asked for this little soul to breathe right away. So, yeah, and this one I had like a midwifery appointment on when I was 40 weeks on the 29th. And that was a sweet little, appointment with my midwife. And I went home and cozied up with my husband. He fell asleep early and I was, I don't know, not able to sleep in that moment. And I had never watched a documentary about psychedelics, but somehow I came across a documentary about psychedelics and decided to put it on, which in hindsight feels so like in alignment because birth can also be a psychedelic experience. So I eventually fell asleep there on the couch and I got up and went to bed. And then in the wee hours of the morning, I woke up with sensations and I sort of stayed in bed, just, see if I could fall back asleep. But I found myself wanting to kind of get up on my hands and knees for each sensation and decided to leave the bedroom and go out to the living room and be in those like quiet early morning hours on my own. So yeah, labored for a while that way. It labor definitely began a little bit stronger this second time than it had the first, but was still very, yeah, reasonable. Didn't feel like overwhelming. Um Yeah, felt just in rhythm.
Mm.
And then when it got closer, it was, I remember 5 or 6 a.m., something like that. I remember I decided to just text message my husband, like to, because I knew when he woke up, he would look at his phone and I just didn't want him to stay in bed, that I wanted him to come out once he was awake. I wanted him rested in case it was another 3-day labor. But unbeknownst to me, he had accidentally left his ringer on, so the text woke him up, and he knows that I hate it when the phone goes off in the morning. So he was like, "Oh no," like thinking he was gonna wake, that the text message would have woken me up. But he read my message and like jumped out of bed and ran out and was like super excited and yeah, was there with me and labor was just still feeling so fine. I love baking bread. I decided to make some bread dough and I had the fire going and put the bread dough by the fire. And I had made a little like list of things that I wanted my husband to do when I was in this earlier labor, like, clean out the toilet again in case I'm vomiting into it and, just vacuum a few little chores. So he sort of started on those, and then I, for whatever reason, wanted to make him eggs for breakfast. I asked him if I could make him some eggs. It felt good to have different things for me to do as well. And he asked if he could jump in the shower. I was like, oh yeah, get in the shower. But then when he was in the shower, after I was done making the eggs, the the energy of the labor just went up like many notches. And the contractions, the sensations just got so much stronger that I decided I wanted to. I'd heard other women say that being in the shower in labor felt really nice. So after he got out of the shower, I got in the shower. And then he was starting to like inflate the birthing pool and do that stuff for me while I was in the shower. But I got in the shower, and again, it felt like they just were even stronger. I did time these contractions a little bit, but they were strong but irregular. So, most medical midwives have a certain like when they're this many minutes apart and increasing and all of this, like that's when you call them.
Mhm.
So it wasn't to like those points. And because the sensations just continued to grow as I was in the shower, I eventually then decided I was going to run myself just a bath there. So I ran myself a bath, and that felt good to just be in our regular bathtub. And then I started wanting my husband closer in the sensations. And so I told him to just forget about the birthing pool, just stay with me here in the bathroom. And so he did, and he asked, do you think we should call the midwife? And I was like, well, maybe. Okay, yeah, you can call her. And so he did call her, and she asked if we wanted her to come. And at that time, I said no. And probably like 5 or 10 minutes later is when I had a sensation and my waters released into the bathtub. And then I could like feel the baby getting closer. And so I said, okay, yeah, like call her back. And I remember those pushing contractions starting again in this labor and finding myself, I had envisioned birthing this baby with this woman, her name is Jane, like present, there was this part of me that kind of withheld and like didn't let go in the same way because I did envision her and want her there.
Mm.
But I was still starting to push. And then she did arrive, and she set her bags down, and she walked in and, looked and could see his head was there starting to emerge. And I was just, a couple of strong pushes. He had his hand over his face, the nuchal hand, and in just a few sensations, he was born 7 minutes after she arrived into our just regular bathtub. And I pulled him up, and he cried right away, which I was super grateful for. My husband ran around like, we have a baby. Like he was just so excited. And we were just so happy to have this breathing baby of ours
Yeah.
there.
Wow.
Hmm.
That is so beautiful and quick. How quick was that?
Quick. His labor was about 6 hours.
Yeah, wow. And I was thinking, I had a hunch when you were starting
Hmm.
to share the story. I was like, I feel like he's gonna be quick. And it's beautiful, like how birth shows us, the baby's birth imprint and their personality a bit. And I was thinking with your first beautiful Baba or your second, we,
Hmm.
your
Hmm.
earlier there, but
Yeah.
people partly how you wanted it to be slow because you didn't want her to be born, but also how
Hmm.
most likely because she had that condition, she also needed that slowness and drawn out labor, right? I've seen that in
Yeah.
so many times as well as women tell their birth stories, that sometimes women will have these kind of longer labors and more gentle in a sense and drawn out because the baby couldn't actually handle something else, right? Um,
Hmm.
so. that was just a thought that came as you were sharing these two different, very different birth stories.
Very different, yes. And yeah, the sensations were very different. Like, yeah, like her emergence, Hartley's emergence was not, painful in the way that I would describe like the next birth, Odin, that his emergence from my body was painful.
Mm,
Hmm.
right.
Yeah.
Do you feel, obviously Hartley was alive, but maybe a bit weaker in her body, physical body. So
Hmm.
obviously the babies birth themselves too. And
Yes.
Odin maybe then had this fire and power and strength in his body to birth himself as well, more powerfully than
Hmm.
Hartley had, which would have contributed to both the length and maybe also the gentleness of how she was born as well.
Yeah, definitely. I do feel like with the longer labor, there's just, yeah, more time for those, those juicy hormones to build up um and just the emergence happening over a longer time than I feel like he was born quite quickly. The emergence, yeah. And I remember I couldn't quite get him like up to my chest. I could only get him kind of just below my breast. His umbilical cord was shorter. And I remember that felt sort of like hard in that moment. Just I wanted him, further up. But I also feel like that has something to do again with like his personality, that it was this, like shorter cord, that he had this different closeness as a young baby that then my daughter after that didn't have, and she had a longer cord.
That is very interesting. I love that. I love talking about and delving into birth imprints and what it tells you about the baby. And thank you for sharing that. It's just so magical. Mm.
Yes.
Did you birth the
So,
placenta as well in the bath?
yeah, so I was still in the bath when I birthed his placenta, and yeah, that was smooth and simple, easy. Then, by that time, the birth assistant had arrived and everyone kind of helped orchestrate for me to, carry baby and get out of the bath and get to the bed. And that was nice. And we cozied in. I know they gave me something to eat and drink. And then Odin also nursed really well from the first day, which again was such a gift. And it felt so beautiful to, have a baby nursing. I did have the opportunity when I was donating milk to breastfeed a couple of different friends' babies, which also just felt so sweet with
Mm,
Hartley's milk before, but this was the first time to get to breastfeed my own baby.
mm,
And that was so special.
so precious. Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Hmm.
And then what happened next? When did you become pregnant again?
Yes, yes. So I had imagined I wanted my little sort of close together, but we sort of thought that when my son was maybe like 2 years old or something like that, we would be open to conception again. But as fate would have it, I did conceive again when he was about a year old, a little over a year old. And it was just unplanned. And I had been tracking my cycle and we hadn't like made love in the time that I knew I was fertile, but I also understand that things happen. So when I looked up my 40-week mark for this baby, it was on my birthday exactly. November 20th was this baby's due date. And I just thought that was so magical because I myself was a baby conceived on birth control. My mom was taking birth control. She didn't miss any pills, and I came on through anyway. So I like felt the energy of this being a baby girl, and it felt so like aligned that her 40-week mark was my birthday. And it was unexpected, but we were happy about it too. So that was really fun. My brother, his wife had just also gotten unexpectedly pregnant with their first baby. And so she was due just like a week or something before me.
Mm.
So that was really fun and felt really special to be pregnant at the same time with these babies that would be cousins.
Mm.
Um, and then in this pregnancy, I was nauseous, but not like throwing up. And then when I was about 11 weeks pregnant, I started bleeding.
Mm.
hmm And yeah, was choosing to this pregnancy, I wasn't going to have any ultrasounds or anything like that. I did choose to do a blood test. Um, and that showed that this baby was a little girl.
Mhm.
hmm But yeah, the bleeding came, and I know that bleeding can happen in pregnancy and it doesn't, you know, there can be multiple different outcomes. So I tried to just be in that for a little while, but the blood became more and more. And yeah, I went through what felt like a little labor. I had another midwife friend came over and was with me while I just, cried and bled in the bath. And that was really beautiful and supportive, but also just felt so sad. It's so interesting. I had other people tell me like after Hartley was born, like, oh, you'll not have another loss. And it's just so interesting that people say
Mhm.
things like that that they can't possibly know. And of course, I knew that that also wasn't true,
Yeah.
but I just don't understand why people
Mm.
say that. Mm.
Mm.
So, yeah, I bled and it was sad and hard, and also just hard with my sister-in-law continuing to be pregnant with also what became a girl, my niece, which I'm so grateful for. Uh, and she was born 5 days before my birthday.
Mm.
So, it's also sweet to just think about her and this other baby. We named her Nyla Rose. And I, buried some of her, like placenta and bits out in our garden, which felt nice and sweet to have those different little ceremonies with her and with the physical form. Um, yeah, and I took my rest in postpartum after I birthed her, and we were then like more open to conception as we hadn't been planning her, but then we were open to the possibility. And sometime later, we did conceive again. And then just 2 weeks later, I had an early birth at 6 weeks,
Mm.
which was, yeah, much less of an experience and more like a heavy period than like Nyla Rose, like her 11-week birth felt very much stronger and bigger. hmm And I started questioning whether or not I would birth another living child. And people started asking me, like, are you going to try again? I can't believe you're going to try again. Or, all
Mm.
these different perspectives from people around me. But I really felt that there was another spirit. I felt a daughter in the cosmos. And I remember it was like near the summer solstice. We had this late night bonfire with friends out at my in-laws' land, and the sky was just gorgeous, and the stars and the moon. And I remember like I took a moment like out in the field by myself and was just with universe and speaking to her and saying, like, is this going to happen? And like now is kind of the time, and saying, if it doesn't happen now, then, that's okay. But I feel it, and I, yearn for this.
Mm.
And then it was that next cycle that we conceived my daughter right close to the summer solstice.
Wow.
And yeah,
And she
uh,
stayed. Mm.
and she stayed, yes. So that felt just amazing. Just I love the connections to the solstices and the equinoxes. And so that felt really fun. I remember we got to go to like a backyard music concert with Mom Muse. And that was super sweet. I didn't know I was pregnant then, but she was there with us
Mm.
and I had known that at that point that this next birth, I did not want a midwife present, that I wanted to just be me and family
Yeah.
and friends.
Beautiful.
Hmm.
Did you during, before you've conceived your daughter that stayed,
Hmm.
did you just lean into the faith of that when your babies didn't stay, that was, natural good, was supposed to happen, that you still trusted your body? Or did you also add something else or do something or a practice, food? Like, did you change something? Was there something that you
Hmm.
yeah, do you know what I mean?
I think I can follow what you're asking. I mean, I still did have some fear. I didn't like change something specific, like dietary or something like that I can think of. It was just more this sort of
Mm.
like spiritual relationship and calling
Yeah.
and uh and trusting and believing that she was there and also trusting that, maybe the bodies weren't quite right and there was a reason why. And actually, after giving birth to her and as she's a toddler and asking her questions, she said that was her. Like those two other times, that was still
Yeah.
her. It wasn't the right body she was waiting for.
Yeah.
So,
Love that. Mm, And the reason I'm asking is just that, there's no right and wrong. How one person,
mm,
of course, chooses to, you know,
yeah,
explore her journey. And I could see how some would want to investigate, like, what are my hormones doing? Or is there something,
right.
I could do, and because a lot of women would also blame themselves and their bodies for being wrong. And I love your
Hmm.
perspective and what you were holding, and I could feel that, hence why I kind of wanted to prod this out of you, that you so much leaned into the greater wisdom and trusting. I love that you could trust and know that your body and your baby's body and soul knows. And if it is, an early loss or a later loss or just, a loss, a birth, early birth,
Hmm.
that it was meant to be that way and that
Hmm.
you could still lean into trust conceiving your daughter.
Yeah, it was, challenging at times. I felt like I maybe had to defend my choices or that other people just were confused or surprised by them.
Yeah.
At this point, had gotten super integrated into the community of women who had experienced the death of a baby at, lots of different stages from early in pregnancy to after birth or, at 40 weeks or um, having mothers who'd had stillborn babies. And almost all of, actually, at the time, I didn't know. I know now some other women who've chosen different paths, but at that time, all the women that I was in a relationship with had chosen a more medicalized path with their babies after that, where
Yeah.
they were doing more testing, more ultrasounds, more, definitely in the hospital, planned C-sections, prior to the date that their previous baby, had died in the womb and
Mm,
things like this.
mm,
Um, but I don't know. I knew that I wanted to free birth this baby at home. I also decided I wasn't going to have that same ultrasound to see if this baby had kidneys. I chose to trust that she probably did, and that if she didn't, I still was going to birth this baby at home,
yeah.
that wouldn't change where I wanted to birth. In her pregnancy, I was very nauseous again and throwing up a lot, which again concerns some people because it was so similar to Hartley's pregnancy in that way that I was throwing up daily, like at work and at home. And like my sweet husband, he wrote me like love notes on the back of the toilet seat and like got me a knee board and like all these things because I was just vomiting like so much.
Mm.
But I did have moments where I was like, oh, what if this is the same? But what if? I I just sat with the what if and wanted to continue forward in the way that I did. So,
That's beautiful, and that's all we can ask, to for each woman to sit with what she's feeling and find her inner answer, and that,
mhm,
the right answer for her is the right answer. There's no right or wrong, it's only yours, and to dare to
mhm.
tune into that first and foremost. I love that.
Yes, so I did do the blood test to know if it was a boy or a girl. Because for me, I wanted to know that. I had felt like my son was a girl, and then him being a boy, it felt I had like a certain level of sadness in that postpartum time that he was a boy.
Mm,
So for me, it felt good to know earlier on.
beautiful.
But yeah, I was excitedly planning this free birth at home. My son was going to be 3 years old at the time of her birth, and he said that he wanted to be present. So I wanted to give that as an opportunity. We watched birth videos together. We talked about different like sounds I might be making and things like that. And he was, just intrigued by the birth videos, really, and thought it was so beautiful. And I showed him mostly free birth videos because that's what he would also be encountering.
Yeah.
And I love birth videos, birth photography. And with my previous two, I do have some photos of after my son was born, but obviously not during labor. So I knew that we also knew this was probably our last baby between me and my husband. And so I really wanted those photos and videos. So I did invite two dear soul sisters of mine, one to take photos, Rakana, and then Clementine to do the video,
Mm.
and was excited to have that. And we also, I spoke to my mother-in-law, Sigrid, and invited her to be my son's kind of like safe person in the birth because I knew that at 3, even if he said he wanted to be there, that there was a possibility that in the moment that wouldn't be the choice he would make and he would maybe want to be somewhere else or do something different. So yeah, that was our kind of like birth team preparation. I created a beautiful space with photos of my ancestors, my grandmother, and, my mom and my other grandmother. And it felt like that's probably where I was going to birth in our living room space. I had a birth altar there. And I decided not to get a birth pool this time. I was like, if I want water, I'll just get in our regular bath, like with my son. And her 40-week mark was March 16th of 2020. So I just finished off my work in the hospital. Haven't worked another day in the hospital since then. Uh, just a few days before the 16th. And that is also sort of when the global pandemic started to unfold. And I had totally thought that my daughter was going to be a Pisces because of where her 40-week mark was. But that time came and went, and I stayed pregnant. And of course, with everything happening, it was an odd time to be about to birth with sort of like the more of the unknowns that were happening right then. But I just surrendered eventually to her own timing, even though part of me wanted to wanted her to come out sooner. But at 41 weeks and 2 days, I woke up in the early morning again and was in labor, and it was like full on this time from the first sensation that I was awoken to. Maybe I was having them while I was sleeping, but it was big, and right away I wanted to get out of bed. I left my husband sleeping. I got out of bed, went out into our living room and tried different positions, tried different things, but nothing seemed to shift. And it's just the sensations were so big and strong. I remember holding my womb and like asking her to slow down, like trying to slow down the labor. But I couldn't. It just kept, she's fire and she's this fiery girl. Like, I mean, it just came through strong and fiery. There was no slowing down. When I couldn't, find a position that was more easeful after about an hour, I like got my husband out of bed. I was like, I just need a witness and someone to be with me, and to see if his energy shifted it felt comforting to have him there, but the sensations just continued. So at one point, my mother-in-law woke up and she was sort of out in that space with us, and I could feel that I actually didn't want her there at that time. I asked her to, and she was like, okay. She went somewhere else. She went downstairs, and then a little bit later, my husband asked, like, do you want me to call? Like he could feel that this was happening quickly again, even though I was still sort of like, maybe it will, maybe it won't. I still didn't know how long it would be. But he called our friends and they arrived sweetly, and it felt nice to have their presence. And in between contractions we're like chatting and laughing and things like that. And I sort of wound up sitting down. We put a painting tarp down on the ground. It's like a cloth painting tarp just to cover our carpet, which felt nice, rather than some people use like a blue tarp that's really plasticky. And I found myself on the floor there. We had a big, like, full length mirror, and I did buy like just a circular mirror that I had down at the bottom so that I could, perhaps move that or have it under me so I could also witness her emergence. And I wound up sort of, my husband behind me leaned up against something, and I was just sort of nestled in his big arms. He's a big guy. He's 6'7" now. He used to be 6'9", but he shrunk a little bit. And I started eventually having those pushy sensations. And so then we had one of the girls go get Sigrid, and she woke up Odin. And there are some sweet pictures of him. Just, yeah, he knew that he might be woken up for the birth. And he did come out and was just so sweet and present there, sat behind us for a little bit and then off to the side. And he remembers that he was like eating cashews during the birth. That's like one of his memories of it. And then just before the sun rose, she started to emerge, and I had those big pushing sensations, and I I could feel my womb like trying to push her out, and I held her in with my hand for several contractions. My perineum I did not feel ready. I just remember, yeah, holding her in. My hand wasn't there, she would have emerged, absolutely. But I held her in and then eventually decided that it was time, and I let go, and her head came out, and everyone was just there and looking, and I could sort of see through the mirrors, which was beautiful. She did her little turn, and then another push came, and she was birthed sort of up to her, maybe like belly button. She flopped out onto the floor like this, and she had the cord sort of like a sash or a lasso. And I felt like I couldn't quite get her the rest of the way out. I asked my husband to like help kind of pull her out, and so he got his hands there, and I asked him to like flip the cord over, but he was nervous about, doing that. And then as he like kind of helped hold her up a little bit, her bum fell out. And then I was able to unwrap the cord and she started crying and, we pulled her up and then we all were crying and just like I remember looking at her and just being like, "Oh, you're the one." And looking again to confirm that she was a girl, and she was. And it was such a relief and so wonderful to have her there on the outside and breathing and alive.
Wow, what a beautiful, beautiful birth. Quick too. How quick was this one?
That one was more like 4 hours. Yeah.
Wow, amazing.
Yes.
And so she had a long cord, and was the placenta also birthed shortly after?
Yeah, shortly after I had felt the sensations for the placenta, and I'd chosen like a pie dish to birth the placenta into. So I just, didn't have to kneel very high, and placenta came out there right, on the floor into the pie dish. And that was, yeah, more useful. And yes, I could bring her all the way up to my chest the way that I couldn't with my son.
Mm.
And everyone was happy and excited, and the team helped me again get to the bed when I was ready to do that and brought me fresh squeezed orange and grapefruit juice. And um yes, and with my son, actually I chose to cut his cord with scissors. I cut it myself. I know it's often like, the husband is asked to do it, but I was like, no, I created this. I am going to cut the cord myself. And with my daughter, I decided I wanted to do a cord burning ceremony. So after a while, after we'd been in bed and she'd nursed and we felt like it was time, I had bought like 4 beeswax, like long tapered candles. And I had a little box. It wasn't, they do make cord burning boxes. It wasn't a cord burning box. It was just a box that I used for cord burning. You don't have to have the exact tools, just so people know. And so I had decided that it was going to be myself, my mother-in-law, and then these two other women, Clementine and Rakana. So the 4 women, we held these 4 candles and sang, "We all come from the goddess." As the cord burned and separated, my daughter just like sat there gazing and watching the flame. And it was a really beautiful ceremony to separate her from her first mother, the placenta.
And that we all come from
From the
the
goddess.
yes, I love that.
Yes.
So sweet, so special. Oh,
Hmm.
what magic your stories hold, both about natural birth and natural death. And I just feel like this is going to heal and be such a soothing story for so many women. Thank you for sharing that with the world. So precious.
An honor. Thank you so much. I love your podcast and all the work that you're doing in the world. It's just, yeah, so inspiring and necessary and so beautiful.
Thank you, Amana. Now, if you had a first time mama in front of you right now, who's about to
Mhm.
have her first baby, and she really wants to have a natural and empowering birth experience, what advice and pearls of wisdoms would you give to her?
Mm. It's such an interesting question because I feel like it's so dependent on that woman and what her experience thus far is. And if you're saying she's about ready to give birth, there's not that much time. But I would just, um, feel like I would just remind her that our ancestors birthed, we were all birthed from women who birthed their babies, and it's not been that many years that we've been in the hospital, and that her body like is so wise and her baby is wise, and to listen to other birth stories that are similar to the birth that she is envisioning and wanting for herself, and to envision that as her experience, those as her experience. And I would just encourage her to lean into the trust to the best that she is able and talk to other wise women.
Beautiful advice. Thank you so much for all your beautiful wisdom, Amana. Thank you.
Mm, yeah.
Thank you for listening. If you love this podcast, then please consider sharing it, leave a review, or make a contribution on our Patreon page. And if you want to connect on social media, then find the podcast on Instagram as the Natural Birth Podcast. Thank you for listening.